Every year, a new iPhone comes out that promises big upgrades to the camera's capabilities. Last year, the iPhone 11 brought some pretty nice improvements with the introduction of night mode and deep fusion, which in my opinion was a pretty big level up in terms of performance. And similarly this year, Apple promised some big upgrades over last year again. So I was very excited to see if Apple actually improved the camera drastically this year, especially in low light. So I went ahead and bought an iPhone 12. So after having the phone for a few days and taking a bunch of photos at night, I'm pretty excited to share my thoughts. For a side-by-side comparison and to see how much the camera has improved, I took my iPhone 11 Pro and my Pixel 4 XL with me. Before I show you guys the photos, I want to talk about what has changed internally in the cameras. This year, Apple made a slight change to the main camera by making the aperture a bit bigger to let in more light compared to last year. In the iPhone 11 Pro, the aperture on the regular camera was 1.8, and this year it has increased to 1.6. The ultra-wide and telephoto cameras seem to have the same lenses as last year, with the same aperture. The ultra-wide has an f-stop of 2.4, and the wide angle is at 2.0. Also, this year Apple introduced night mode to the ultra-wide camera, which is something that's not available on the 11 Pro. I'm pretty sure Apple can enable that on the 11 Pro, but they won't do that because they need something to differentiate between the two phones. Let me share my process. I only shot handheld, which means I didn't use any tripod or any stand. And to keep things super simple, I only used the stock camera app and didn't use any third-party apps. Also, in most places, I took the same photo with my iPhone 11 Pro and my Pixel 4 XL to see how it compared to the older generation. When shooting with the main wide-angle camera, in most cases, the photos from the 11 Pro looked pretty much identical to the 12 Pro, and I had to double-check the folders multiple times because I myself was getting confused while going through everything. The photos on the 12 Pro are generally a bit brighter with slightly more details in the shadows, but you could easily fool me by increasing the exposure slightly on the 11 Pro. When comparing to the Pixel 4, I noticed the Pixel tends to take slightly cooler shots with a bit more contrast, and in my opinion, it looks a bit better. Both the 11 and the 12 Pro lean a bit more towards warmer tones overall. The ultra-wide camera is where the differences start to become more apparent. The 11 Pro doesn't have night mode on the ultra-wide, which leads to almost unusable photos in low light, unless you use a longer shutter speed with a third-party app. The 12 Pro has the same camera, but due to night mode, the difference is night and day. Because the sensor isn't as big as the main camera on the wide-angle camera, even with night mode, the photos are pretty mediocre. I'd say only use this lens in low light with a stand, or if you have no other option. The Pixel 4 XL doesn't have an ultra-wide camera, so there are no comparisons to be made here. Apple is being very sneaky with the night mode on the 2x lens. I was under the impression that the telephoto camera also had night mode, but when I looked at the metadata, I saw that the aperture was a 1.6 on the 12 Pro and 1.8 on the 11 Pro, which means the iPhones use the primary camera and then digitally zoom in for the 2x zoom in most cases. I'll include a link to all the photos in the description so you can see this for yourself. I must be honest, this is pretty misleading on Apple's end. While the Pixel 4 XL also switches back to the primary camera in extreme cases, it still uses the 2x camera most times. The photos at 2x on the iPhones are usable, and the quality is close to the Pixel as the primary camera has a bigger sensor. But when I took photos at 5x, things became pretty clear. The Pixel easily outperformed both iPhones by quite a big margin. With the iPhone 12, Apple also introduced night mode to portrait mode. I tested this in a control setting on all three phones. The Pixel zoomed in when switching to portrait mode and had a lot of noise in the photo. The edge detection was fine, but not that impressive, especially around the hair. The iPhone 11 Pro did a pretty good job, but because it doesn't have night mode and portrait mode, the photos are not as bright. Also, I noticed the edge detection on the 11 Pro wasn't as good as the 12 Pro. The iPhone 12 Pro did a fantastic job in that department. Even though I was backlit, I was able to fill the light thanks to night mode and a slightly bigger aperture. The bloom from the lights behind me was reflected in a pretty realistic way, and the edges also looked pretty natural thanks to LiDAR. When I switched to the front camera, the differences got much smaller. Both the 11 Pro and the 12 Pro looks almost identical in terms of quality and the edges, as there was no LiDAR sensor on the front. The Pixel did a pretty good job here as well, and I prefer the wider angle of the Pixel. It's not perfect around the edges, but I like the cooler colors here. None of the phones here are perfect, and it really comes down to personal preference. One big issue I have with Apple's cameras is the lens flare I got in almost all my photos with lights directly facing the camera. It led to a lot of dots when there were multiple lights, and I thought that was pretty distracting. I really hope Apple fixes this in the future generations, either through hardware or maybe improvements to the software. So now the question is, should you upgrade to the iPhone 12 Pro? I'd say if you currently have the 11 Pro, you don't really need to upgrade. Apart from night mode on the ultra-wide camera, not a lot has changed. The quality is very similar. You're not going to notice a difference in a lot of cases, but if you have a camera older than the 11 Pro, I think that's where you're going to notice a big difference. I mean, last year, Apple dramatically improved the quality, and this year, it's only gotten better. And if you are a Pixel user, I'd say be happy. The cameras on the Pixel are still very good. The quality is top-notch. The low-light performance is just as good as the iPhones, if not better. And I think Google's done a pretty good job. Thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe for more technology and photography content.